I was sitting in my pool chair with a paperback and a cold coffee sun on my knees. Dog curled at my feet when a patrol car rolled up like it was dropping off a pizza, and two officers leaned over the gate and asked if I lived there. They asked it like it was a trivia question, like they expected me to guess the right answer. And when I told them my name, the younger one smirked and said, "You sure about that?" That three-word line, "You sure about that?" is the sound that stuck with me. The moment ordinary Sunday turned into a ledger of what people believe you're allowed to be. My name's Daniel Rhodes. I've lived at Willow Ridge for 3 years, the third-floor corner unit with the fire escape that looks over the pool, the one with the chipped blue chair I sit in every Sunday. I grew up 2 towns over. I fix refrigerators for a living, and I keep my life small on purpose. Work, a good book, my neighbor raised terrible plant advice. None of that matters when somebody sees what they expect to see instead of what's actually there. Margaret Cole, our HOA president, had called the cops because someone didn't look like they belonged by the pool. That was her phrase, said over the HOA listserv, polite and precise in the way small cruelties often are. At first, the officers were all soft voices and small talk. What's your name? Can you show ID? Where do you work? But there's a difference between a friendly question and a search for permission. Officer Hale asked to look at my key card, the one issued to residents, and held it like it might bite him. He read my name, then read it back like a test, and I felt my skin tighten. Ray caught the whole thing on her phone from her balcony, whispering to herself about how ridiculous it was. He's been here since forever. But when the footage went up on the neighborhood feed, fingers started pointing and stories started trailing after them. The thing about small communities is they collect stories like they collect mail. One person's suspicion becomes 10 conversations, becomes a printed complaint, becomes a formal letter sent to the board. Margaret's motive wasn't a single villainous act. It was a tangle, a fenced-in idea of what the complex should look like, pressure from a few newer residents who liked the neat, quiet aesthetic, and a long-harbored resentment that the pool group had its own rhythm that she wasn't part of. She'd been on the board 6 years. She liked rules the way some people like religion: strict, unquestioned, comforting. After the video went up, the comments rolled in, some supportive, some apologetic, a few with the kind of passive-aggressive defensiveness you only see under a keyboard. A couple of people suggested the police response was standard, that someone reported something suspicious, that maybe I'd been confrontational. The worst line was, "We just want our neighborhood to feel safe." Safety, in that sentence, was code. It meant feeling safe from people who looked different, from people whose ordinary acts sitting by the pool, laughing with a dog, made others uncomfortable. I didn't initially think I wanted a fight. I just wanted someone to say sorry. But sorry isn't a thing that undoes a public moment. It's a word that sits there while your life rearranges itself around a rumor. So I started writing things down. Names, times, what was said, screenshots of the messages. The video Ray shot. Evidence is boring until it's not, until you need it. My sister, June, told me to hold on, to breathe, but she also said, firm as always, don't let them write the story for you. That's when I filed a complaint with the HOA and an internal affairs tip with the department. It felt clumsy and adult, paperwork instead of righteous shouting, but paperwork has teeth. Margaret called a meeting, community forum. She said in the room smelled like cheap coffee and nervous ambition. There were two sides, people who had known each other for 10 years and new faces who wanted systems and bylaws tightened. Margaret spoke in a voice designed to placate and firm up at the same time, the voice of someone who knows how to hold a mic and a lie in the same breath. Then she pivoted to me, the meeting folding in on me like a stage. I stood up, hands pushed deep into my pockets, tried to make my voice ordinary. "You didn't have to know me to treat me like a guest in my own home," I said. I told them about the day, how the officers watched me like I was an exhibit, how neighbors leaned into their windows to whisper, how a man I'd waved at 2 years ago crossed the street to avoid me. I described the micro things that make a person feel unwelcome, the double takes, the sudden clutches of purses, the calls to the board about suspicious behavior. I wanted them to see this wasn't just about one cop or one chair. It was about permission. Who gets to be calm in public and who gets to be presumed guilty? Margaret's response was tactical empathy, soft words, a promise to review procedures, and a mention that some residents felt uneasy. Her language quietly made discomfort sound like equal footage. Mine was a demand for dignity. The push and pull in that room was cinematic and petty, the kind of slice-of-life drama that makes for great feeds but terrible experiences. A few neighbors stood up for Mireille, who handed her phone to the HOA clerk and said, plainly, "This is what happened." An older man named Hector, who'd been in the building since the smog days, talked about how the community used to be about helping each other. He said, with a voice that made people quiet, "We're better than this." The police department put the two officers on administrative leave pending review. Margaret released a statement about following up on resident concerns. The HOA agreed to a workshop on bias training, which read like a victory until you read the fine print: mandatory for new volunteers, optional for the longtime board. There were small, imperfect changes, clearer guidelines on when to call law enforcement, a neighborhood liaison program, a suggestion box. The changes sounded like progress because progress is allowed to be slow when it's convenient. But the real change happened in the small spaces. Neighbors who used to cross the parking lot to avoid eye contact started to say hello. Ray organized a poolside barbecue, and more people came than expected. It wasn't dramatic. It was awkward at first, with the silence of strangers who knew about each other's opinions, but not their stories. I sat in my chip chair and watched a kid. No, I'll change that. There were no kids in this scene. This is adults learning to be neighborly. Watch me approach with a nervous grin. We shared a burger. We laughed about a shared dead-end street that always filled with leaves in the fall. It was small citizenship, showing up. There was also a cost. People whispered that I made a fuss, that I'd made it political. Margaret and her supporters hinted that I'd tried to cash in on a story, that I enjoyed the attention. The rumor mill churned out its version of mecomplainer, attention seeker, troublemaker. It's funny how quickly you can be rebranded. That's why the real fight isn't the meeting or the memo. It's living after the first impression. The ledger I kept of dates and emails turned into hard proof when the department's internal memo echoed some of our concerns and suggested retraining. It wasn't a headline-worthy victory. No arrests, no dramatic firings, just a slow administrative correction. But it was enough to make the officers think twice the next time they were called for a suspicious person at a pool. The climactic moment for me was not a gavel or a news clip. It was Margaret and I meeting at the mailbox 3 weeks later. She looked smaller without the microphone and the committee behind her. I could have yelled. I could have leaned into the public theater and demanded apologies in a way that would trend for a day. Instead, I chose the thing I'd wanted all along: acknowledgement. She cleared her throat. A board member's apology, careful and guarded, and said, "I wish this hadn't happened." It was soft, not whole, but it was an admission. I said, "That's a start." We walked away in the opposite directions of two people who had shared a neighborhood, but not a history. This story doesn't end with fireworks. It ends with coffee in the morning and the small ritual of me unlocking my door, the chipped blue chair and sunlight, neighbors who now nod instead of turning away. It ends with Ray and Hector and half the building signing a petition to change the HOA's reporting language. More vague, suspicious behavior, boxes, more specific guidelines that require someone to actually witness harm before escalating to police. It ends with me still a fridge repairman, still reading paperbacks, still loving the quiet. But I am also someone who knows how to keep a record, how to press institutions with polite persistence, how to ask for dignity and give it back when it's offered. I won't pretend it was clean. It was messy pride and fear and a community learning to look in the mirror. Some people left. Some people stayed. Some things fixed themselves. Others only got bandaged. That's the messy truth of trying to make small changes in a place that likes to think of itself as already right. If you've ever been the person in the chair, if you've ever been watched until you felt like a draft in someone else's houser, if you've ever been the person who saw something and called it in because you were scared, this isn't a lecture. It's a conversation starter. Talk about it. Share what dignity looks like to you. If you're in a community with an HOA, check the reporting rules, and if they sound like they let suspicion substitute for proof, maybe push for clearer language. Leave a comment below, say what you think is fair, say what made you uncomfortable, tell the story of the time you learned to sit in your own space without asking permission. Hit share if this feels familiar, and if you're new here, subscribe. Let's build a channel that's curious and honest. This is one small neighborhood's mess, but it's also one small lesson. Dignity is a daily practice, not a headline.